There's nothing quite like the crispy and rich and gooey chicken parmesan made from scratch. Let me show you how to make this dish at home, and let me show you how to use all homemade ingredients so that you really can elevate your dish. Although I know a lot of people buy breadcrumbs at the grocery store, they're actually very simple to make, and homemade breadcrumbs are far superior than the store-bought breadcrumbs. I have various pieces of bread that I have in my freezer from bread that I had made, and we did not have a chance to eat it all, so I just froze it, and now I took it out. I'm going to heat it a bit so that I can make breadcrumbs from it. The next component that I really recommend making from scratch rather than buying from the store is the marinara sauce that goes on top of the chicken parmesan. Now, marinara sauce can be bought from the store if need be, and you could still follow along with this recipe, but it's just such a superior flavor and quality sauce if you make it at home. The ingredients are fairly simple. Here I am just dicing an onion. I will also finely chop a garlic clove. Any Italian dish that I cook, I really try to cook from scratch. My husband is Italian and he grew up eating his Nonna's food. I had the privilege of getting to know his Nonna for a decade. I saw the passion that she had for cooking homemade meals that brought the whole family together. It inspired me to become more intentional with what I eat and what I cook, and to try to make everything from scratch as much as possible. There you saw me quickly fry up some onions and some garlic in some olive oil. Once that was cooked, I added a jar of my homemade tomato sauce. So these were tomatoes that we canned over the summer. I will let the sauce simmer throughout the day as I tend to the other ingredients or components of this meal. We will need to add some salt to the marinara sauce. And if your tomato sauce is acidic, then I would recommend adding some carrots to sweeten it, or maybe even a pinch of sugar if need be. I want to make sure to get every little bit out of my jar of tomato sauce because those are homegrown, home canned tomatoes. So I will add some water to the jar, shake it up, and pour that in to simmer away with the rest of the sauce. Now for the breadcrumbs, I just broke the bread into smaller pieces. It was frozen bread, so I'm really trying to get rid of a lot of the moisture. I will need to get rid of all the moisture to turn it into breadcrumbs. But before I blend it, I want it to be slightly dry or else it'll become all clumpy and won't really blend very well. So now that I was able to get rid of a lot of moisture in the oven, I can take the bread and put it in my blender. I'm just going to pulse it, blend it quickly, and when it is at my desired consistency, I will put it on a cookie sheet and I'll finish it off by putting it back in the oven afterwards to fully dry it out. What I like most about my homemade breadcrumbs as opposed to the store-bought breadcrumbs is I find if I buy them at the store, they're quite powdery and they're really way too fine. I like to have a little bit thicker chunks. I find it helps get my chicken extra crispy, and there's just an added flavor and taste to them that's delicious. Now that I'm done with the blender and I have them on a cookie sheet, I will just spread them out and I will put them in the oven at about 300 degrees for 10 to 15 minutes until I feel like they're crispy enough. You don't want to cook them in the oven, you just want to take out all the moisture. So here I'm done, my breadcrumbs are ready to go. Remember, these are unseasoned breadcrumbs. They're not like Italian breadcrumbs you buy at the store. So when you use them, you should add seasoning to them. So I will add things like oregano. I even add some Parmesan cheese for this chicken Parmesan and salt so that it has flavor. Now it's time to prepare the chicken. I have 4 chicken breasts here that I'm taking out. I like to buy my chicken in bulk, and so if I find a good deal on chicken breasts, I'll buy a large quantity, and then I will freeze them and vacuum seal the bag so that it stays fresh for longer. The way that I prepare the chicken is I slice it into smaller, thin pieces. So normally with 1 chicken breast, I will get 3 or 4 pieces of chicken. If I have more time, I may butterfly the chicken, so slice it open so that I could spread the 2 sides like a butterfly towards the outside, and then potentially I'll pound it down with a meat hammer, but I don't have time for that right now, and sometimes I just like saving myself that step, so I just try to slice it as thin as possible. Here's another angle so you can see how I slice it. So it's a lengthwise slice that I just let my knife do the work and move my knife through it. And I'll also normally take the chicken tender, so that's the little piece that's hanging off, and I'll make that its own individual piece as well. So I'm looking for the tender here in this piece, and I'm about to cut it out. You want to have the chicken relatively thin because it's not going to take long for the breadcrumbs to fry in the oil, and you want to make sure that the chicken is cooked all the way through. Now, I will cook the chicken a second time when I put it in the oven after it's been breaded and once I make the whole chicken parmesan dish where I add the sauce and the cheese to it. But I won't be cooking it for very long. It'll just be enough time to get the cheese to melt and to heat everything. So I want to make sure that it's thin enough so it will fully cook the first time around. Now that I have the chicken fully cut, it is time to prepare the breading components. So of course I'm going to need my breadcrumbs, and I have my breadcrumbs there, and I added a bit of Parmesan cheese to it. Now I'm going to season them with dried oregano, and I'll also put some salt in there. It's really important that you have nicely seasoned breadcrumbs because that's where a lot of the flavor comes from. I'm never sure how many breadcrumbs I will need for this whole batch of chicken, so I keep them handy on the stove there in case I need more, and I definitely will need more. But I don't like to put an excessive amount. I don't want to throw too much of them out because I just took all this time to make these breadcrumbs, so I don't want to potentially contaminate them with chicken and then have all these extra breadcrumbs that I then need to toss. So I'd rather just have to make the batch again and again. I also put about a cup of flour there, and now I'm going to beat 3 eggs. So these 3 bowls hold the components that we will need to bread our chicken. I'm going to thoroughly mix these components. I want to make sure that the seasoning is fully mixed into the various bowls here. I will also season the chicken with some salt. It has happened to me before where I've forgotten to season the breadcrumbs or the chicken, and it is so disappointing because it will have this crunchy texture to it, but it just won't have the taste that is desired. So please do not skip this step. Make sure you well season everything. Now, the way this is going to work, we're going to put the chicken in the flour, make sure it's fully coated, then into the egg wash, and then finally in the breadcrumbs. We need to make sure we press these elements into them and that we fully coat the chicken with each of these components. I prefer to do this by using this 2-fork method where I keep 1 fork for dry and 1 fork for wet. So egg will definitely be getting my fork all wet. And if I use that same fork and moved on to the breadcrumbs, it would end up clumping up together and just getting this whole mess all over the place. So I'll use a second fork where I will try not to get any of the egg on it, but I will use it to push breadcrumbs onto the chicken, and I'll kind of press down on those breadcrumbs to make sure that the chicken is fully coated. Once I've completed that, I will transfer the chicken to the finished plate where they will remain until I fry them. So it's funny, normally I like to use my fingers to, I don't know, perform most tasks. I don't really like wearing gloves when I'm in the garden or even when I'm dealing with food. I usually get my hands dirty and get right in there when I'm mixing meat or when I'm, I don't know, working with different foods. But for some reason, breading chicken, it just really bothers me to get everything on my hands. I hate the feeling of the egg and the breadcrumbs and, everything just like gunking up on my fingertips. So I prefer to use forks. But if you're someone who doesn't mind getting their hands dirty in this regard, then go for it. It would probably be a lot quicker if I used my hands, but I just prefer to do it this way. I also think I may prefer not to get my hands dirty like this, especially when it comes to using chicken, because sometimes my kids call me on a whim and I need to go there quick. And if I have my hands full of gunked up breadcrumbs from raw chicken, then it's going to take me a little while to get them fully cleaned and make sure that, there's no residue from the chicken left on them. So this way, it's a lot quicker for me to clean my hands and tend to my kids. So here I'm giving you more of an overhead view of what I'm doing. I really recommend setting up your station in an orderly fashion, such as I have here, where each of the bowls are easily accessible. It will make the process a lot smoother. It's somewhat of a conveyor belt type of motion where you just move from one side to the next and do this repetitive task. Sometimes I like to switch it up and, have one of the chicken pieces in each of the bowls, or Sometimes I'll just go directly from the flour to the egg to the breadcrumbs with one piece of chicken. I don't know. It's however I just feel like I want to do it. You can choose to coat your chicken however you please. Just make sure it's fully coated in the end, and that way it'll turn out delicious when we fry it. So at this point, we are pretty much making chicken cutlets. Chicken cutlets is another meal that my family loves where I don't add necessarily the marinara sauce and the cheese on top. It's more of a simplified version, and you can eat it with some lemon juice. It's delicious. It's nice and crispy once you fry it. I remember when I was younger, my mom used to make me chicken cutlets quite often. She would always serve it on a bed of rice, and usually with some sort of green vegetable on the side. It was nothing too fancy, but it was always a dish that my sister and I loved. You could even turn chicken cutlets into somewhat of a freezer meal. So when I was pregnant with my fourth child, I made a big batch of chicken cutlets. I fried them and then I flash froze them. So I put them on a cookie tray into the freezer once they were all cooked and ready to go. And I froze them and then I transferred them to a Ziploc bag so that I would be able to pull out as many as I needed later on once I had given birth and I needed a fast meal. Then I would pull the chicken cutlets out and I would just throw them in the oven for about 10 minutes each side, maybe even less, at around 375 or 400 degrees. And once they were warmed fully through, then my family and I would be able to enjoy it. It was a quick, fast meal, and my kids loved it. It was honestly one of our favorites, and we ate through the chicken cutlets so quick. I feel like I could never even make enough freezer meals of chicken cutlets. There's no way it would last longer than a month or two in this house, even if I made, hundreds of these cutlets. I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating there, but it's just anytime I make it as a freezer meal, it tends to be the first freezer meal to go. I am refilling the breadcrumbs there. I'm adding some more spices again because I want to make sure that they're nice and tasty. But I ran out a bit in the dish, so I just grabbed some from behind me. I made sure to use clean hands and wash them first because I do not want to contaminate my breadcrumbs with raw chicken at all. And although I'm not touching the chicken, just to be extra safe, I washed my hands before putting them in any other food. What I really like about these breadcrumbs is they're a little coarser than what you would find at the store. And there's something about a coarser breadcrumb that really just fries so well in the oil. I also find when I use these breadcrumbs to make things like meatballs or meatloaf, something that needs a bit of bread to absorb some of the moisture, especially if you're adding egg to it. It just gives it this delicious texture where it's nice and moist and juicy, and it doesn't cause the meat to become firm and, kind of dense. And let me tell you, my husband thought I was a little crazy when I was about 38 weeks pregnant and I was busy making chicken cutlets. And when he asked me where the breadcrumbs were, I told him I had to bake a loaf of bread and then turn that loaf of bread into breadcrumbs. And he was just like, why do you do this to yourself? Why do you put all that extra work on yourself? But it's because the food is just such a better quality. And I know he was so appreciative that I went through that effort and that we were able to eat these delicious meals later on after we had a new baby. I just don't have it in me anymore to buy breadcrumbs from the store, especially after looking at the ingredient list, the long ingredient list that is, and just knowing the quality of the food that I could make if I make it at home from scratch. This is also something I like to instill in my kids, and they often do help with these tasks of making breadcrumbs or, preparing food, even if sometimes their help is a bit more hindering than it is. I really want them to grow up knowing good quality food, good quality ingredients, and appreciating it. So I transferred the rest of those breadcrumbs to a jar, and we will enjoy them in a different meal later on. The next step is to fry up these chicken cutlets. So I'm using lard here to fry it. I recommend using lard or avocado oil or even peanut oil. Make sure not to crowd the pan. It's so rare that I can actually play the sound of the food cooking. I normally have some sort of kid screaming or laughing or, just making noise in the background. So these voiceovers are a lot easier than me trying to record with all the noise in the background. So I'm going to cook these on both sides. It usually takes about 3 to 5 minutes per side. I'm trying to multitask here, and my kids are asking me to iron their perler beads. I don't know if anyone else has ever done that fun activity, but they are working on that while I cook this chicken. As I cook the chicken, I'm sort of fiddling with the heat. I'm trying to leave it on medium or just, a smidge below medium. But if the pan gets too hot or the oil gets too hot, then I'll turn it down a bit if I notice that the breadcrumbs are browning a bit too quickly. I want to make sure that the chicken gets cooked fully through. You could use a thermometer to check that the chicken is fully cooked. You're aiming for 165 degrees. You really want to make sure to give it enough space in the pan, because if you put too many pieces of chicken in the pan and they can't be fully immersed with oil, then they won't brown nicely. I will also add more lard to the pan if I see that the oil level is running low. I really recommend using some higher quality oil or lard and not using any sort of vegetable oil. Seed oils are really not healthy for us, and I do not use them in my kitchen, and you should really try to avoid them also. I understand that things like lard or higher quality oils can be a little pricier, and they're definitely more expensive than vegetable or canola oil. And this is also why I try to make a lot of things from scratch, because if I can save money in that regard, then I can put it into better quality ingredients. I'm transferring the chicken to a wired rack when it's done cooking. Now that the chicken sounds nice and crispy, let's move on to building the dish. So the way that my husband's Nonna used to make this dish is that she would always put it on a bed of thinly sliced potatoes. Sometimes she would even add a layer of eggplant too. So it was kind of like building somewhat of a chicken parmesan lasagna. I used a mandolin to thinly slice these potatoes, and I am just going to make sure to season them well with some olive oil and salt. I can guarantee that Nonna did not use a mandolin and she sliced her potatoes by hand, but sometimes we just make our lives a bit easier by using some tools that will really benefit us in the kitchen. And if you do use a mandolin, be very careful with it. They are very sharp. I remember when my brother-in-law bought me this mandolin, the first time I used it, I sliced my fingers multiple times and I threw it in the back of the cupboard because I did not want to touch it. It took me several months to pull it back out again, but now it is a tool that I really love because I can get things sliced so thin and evenly, which I think is really important when making certain foods. So here I'm just going to layer it by putting a layer of tomato sauce down on the bottom, and I'm going to put the potatoes all throughout the dish nice and thin. I did cook them in the oven for a bit, for about 10-15 minutes at 425, just to make sure that they were cooked through, so that way they're not raw potatoes in my dish. I'm going to take the chicken now and try to fully cover one layer in the dish, and then I will add some more sauce on top. So like I said before, it's a bit of a lasagna type, but this is exactly how Nonna made it, and this is how my family likes it best, and I think you should really give it a try because this layered method is absolutely delicious. You want to make sure to put a decent amount of sauce, but you also don't want to completely soak it in sauce and have it swimming in the sauce. You want to maintain a bit of the crunchiness of the chicken. Now I have some Parmesan mozzarella cheese here that I'm putting on top. I like to put a good layer of cheese, but I don't like to, just put an excessive amount. I think cheese should be used in moderation. It shouldn't completely take over the dish. But if you're someone who likes a lot of cheese, go for it. The more the merrier. You know how your family likes it best, so do it however you please. And then finally, I think this is such an important step, is to add some fresh basil. There's something that happens to fresh basil when it's sitting on a bed of cheese. It's as if the oils from the cheese add this crunchy, kind of sweet texture element to it, and it tastes so good. It really enhances the basil flavor. So now it's ready for me to pop it into the oven. I'm not looking to cook this for hours. I'm really just looking to get the cheese nice and melted and golden, and I'm looking for everything to be heated all the way through. Here's what it looked like when it came out of the oven. The cheese was nicely browned, and my husband is awkwardly filming me trying to eat this for dinner. We were able to eat this for several days too, so it covered more than one meal, and it was absolutely delicious.